So, what's it going to cost us to properly fund reserves? Many associations fear the answer to this question to the point of neglecting to even get a reserve study. But there's something even scarier: special assessments. Remember that deterioration itself is a fact of life. It's going to happen, and it costs real money. So you have two choices. You can either put the right amount aside every month to properly fund your reserves, or you can ignore reserve funding and suffer the consequences of painful and expensive special assessments. So, what does choosing to fund reserves look like? In this portion of our Breaking Down Reserve Funding webinar, I'll describe the tools and the rules. The tools are the two different mathematical methods used to calculate reserve funding requirements, and the rules are the National Reserve Study standards that lay down the terminology and guidelines.
Well, thank you, Paige. Thank you for those polls that help me to understand who we have here today. So hello, hardworking managers and board members. Thank you for joining our webinar today when we'll be breaking down the Reserve Studies funding plan. So based on your feedback last year, we prepared this series of 4 breaking down webinars. It started with breaking down and providing insights to the overall process, then the Reserve Study document itself, then how the expenses are all identified, and finally today, the 4th and final portion of this 4-part series, we break down the funding plan for you. Now, reserves are all about helping you prepare to accomplish the major repair and replacement projects at your association in a timely manner. So it's all a matter of providing the income to pay for those anticipated expenses. It's really that simple. Well, it's that simply stated. In our last webinar, we showed you what projects qualify as expenses and the process of making all those estimates. If you missed any of those prior webinars, you can watch them on YouTube or find links to them on our website. So today, knowing those projects are going to occur and knowing how expensive they'll be, we're going to talk about funding. But even though it is simply stated, there are many nuances involved in getting it right for you and your association. So settle in and let me take you on a journey through the process of developing a funding plan. This is the outline we'll follow for today's program. I'll familiarize you with the tools, rules, and goals, so you'll then have the working knowledge to be able to follow me successfully through some actual examples. So starting with the tools and the rules, the foundation for the funding plan are the tools to be used, and then the rules that provide the guidance. This is the foundation for everything else that we're going to speak about in today's program. The tools are the methods by which the funding plan is calculated, and it's just math, but I'll show you there are 2 very different approaches to attacking the problem of finding out how much money to set aside for upcoming projects. And just a reminder, you see that asterisk there. How those projects are identified was our last webinar, and it's now available on our website or on YouTube. So if we want to do some catching up, it's very easy to do that. Now, those tools are just math, but I want to point out that there's 2 different ways to look at it for exactly the same projects, okay? And again, another asterisk there. It's kind of like the metric way or the English way. 2 different ways to address the same problems of identifying or communicating how big something is. So the first of them is the component method. The component method is where you focus on doing some calculations for each separate component, and thus the title. You can see the components listed here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. Useful life, remaining useful life cost. Find out how much, or set how much reserves are attributed to each one. Look at the difference, fund that over time, and you get the funding requirements. So it's a matter of doing some calculations across and then summing them down. Okay, so it's kind of a 2-step process: calculate across and sum down. The cash flow method is a little bit different. Again, it's the same components, exactly the same components, but you look at it in a different way. The first step is to lay them out over time. What are the expenses going to be? And you look at the annual totals. So you're looking at reserve expenses, not roofing or painting or pool or anything like that. You look at the reserve expenses, and then you provide the cash that is needed. You look at the annual reserve funding, find out, starting with the reserve balance, how much funds you need to put in, so you'll have enough money at the end of the year. You start the next year, and it's back and forth and back and forth. And you're looking at the cash flow for the association, not looking at it on a individual component by component basis. So the component method is calculations and equations. It's adding and subtracting and dividing, and it's each component individually. The cash flow method is you lay out the expenses and then you test and retest the funding that's required. It's not a direct mathematical solution. And we're looking at annual expenses, not individual projects, okay? So that's two different ways to look at the same set of expenses. Nothing different about expenses. Now, cash flow method is the preferred method because fundamentally it uses association dollars more efficiently. They're not tucked away into different corners assigned to different specific projects. It allows more funding plan flexibility, and I'll show you that later on. And the great result is it regularly results in lower funding requirements for the association. Okay, so what would be some good rules? And let's do some thinking, okay? You're there. What would be some good rules for reserve funding? Let's start out with my suggestion of have enough cash. Paige said that at the very beginning. Having enough cash to get the projects done. That seems like that would be a good rule. Do it so you have enough cash. Another would be kind of related, no special assessments. Let's have the cash set aside so we don't have to surprise our owners with a special assessment for something that deteriorated in plain sight over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. And how about another rule? Make sure everyone pays their fair share. So it's fair across the membership. Everyone pays their fractions along the way so you don't get a new couple or a new owner that just moved in and they get hit for a special assessment for deterioration that happened long before they were there. That's really not fair. Or on the other hand, it's not fair for an owner to be paying low reserve funding for 20 years and then sell right before some expenses begin to hit. Now, the fourth one, and this is for condos, a good rule is to fund minimum 10% of budget towards reserves. Now, that comes from FHA requirements. It's been adopted by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac pretty much. And so your owners are going to get more favorable mortgage terms if the lenders can see that you're setting aside a minimum of 10% of budget. So that's just plain in the best interest of your owners. That's going to help your sales prices. And you may be scratching your head about that, but let me show you this chart. In 2021, we did a study of 2,000 reserve sites that we've done just for condo associations. And all but 3 of them, 1,997 of them, which is 99.85%, needed more than 10% of budget going to reserves. And you see this gray circle here, and you wonder, Robert, why are you showing us a gray circle? Well, that's a pie chart. And you can't even see the slice of associations that legitimately, condo associations that had legitimate reserve funding less than 10% of budget. It's just trivia. Actually, it's ridiculous. Those were 3 very significant exceptions, and so it's a good rule. That's what I want to communicate here. That if you're a condo association, start out with a minimum 10% of budget going to reserves. That's just going to serve you and the association well. Okay, then we get 2 more rule-type things. The official rules that we deal with here in the reserve study industry are National Reserve Study Standards. First published in 1998. They've been updated a couple times, and they are, again, currently in revision at this point in time. Should be republished in about a month, I understand. But what we're looking at is the rules, the reserve funding principles, according to the National Reserve Study Standards, are these 4 things. Having sufficient cash, having a stable contribution rate so you're not bumping things around with every painting project or roofing project or a pool project. It's evenly distributed and it's fiscally responsible. So the kind of things we were talking about a moment ago, the things you'd like to see is have enough cash, and you'd like everyone to pay their fair share. You'd like to be good for owners to get favorable mortgages, good for buyers to get favorable mortgages at your association, and everyone paying their fair share, things like that. Those are the good things, and they're very appropriately what we see in National Reserve Study standards. So it's all aligning together, and these are the guiding principles, the tools and the rules guiding what we do.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you want to join us in this mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us address in a future video. Let's plan for your best future.